Hi, I'm Craig Wesco, and I'm recording this Christspiracy film review for Creation Care Church and Swords to Plowshares. So warning, there's spoilers in this review, and it's going to be a very detailed review. You can find the full review in written form with clickable links at s2p.org or creationcarechurch.org. So first impressions, wow. This Christspiracy film was pretty amazing. I think they did some really great things. I think the one thing that stood out to me the most is they did a really excellent job of painting the picture of what this temple practice was, how they were buying and selling animals for sacrifice, and they just did a really excellent job with that. They also did a really good job of showing how this has been obscured for so long. And also, I was impressed by the level of scholarship of the people that they interviewed. I think some of the people, Robert Eisenman, James Tabor, Andrew Lindsay, and several others, really great people to be interviewed for this subject. So regardless of whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, this film will deepen your understanding of who Jesus was, and especially why he opposed this sacrificial system. So if you haven't seen it yet, prepare to have your mind blown when you do watch it. So before I sort of get started into my review, which is going to be 18 points that I'm going to look at in detail that they make in the film, a little about myself. Who am I? Well, first and foremost, I'm a committed disciple of Jesus since 2003. I've also been vegan since 2009. I'm currently the pastor / live speaker at Creation Care Church, and my academic background consists of I got my graduate degree in the history of philosophy and religious studies in 2008, and my research primarily focuses on early Christianity and source criticism. And I taught university courses in New Testament, ethics, critical thinking, and several other subjects. And I currently run a vegan Christian discipleship school through Creation Care Church and Swords to Plowshares. So this film was definitely right up my alley, something that was very much in alignment with the things that I'm focusing my research on. So I first heard about this film when I met Kip and Cam in 2019 at the Los Angeles Animal Liberation March. And I ended up having a conversation with Cam where he was telling me about some of the things that were involved in this film. And after seeing the finished product, I was just really impressed with how it turned out. So great job, Kip and Cam. And that's also where I did a short interview with Pastor Rob Monroe, who's also in the film. And if you'd like to see that, I have a link to that. The interview can be watched here. And we talk about the Den of Thieves and the least of these. So if you'd like a sort of early, this is, I guess, 5 years ago almost. If you'd like to see some sort of behind the scenes kind of footage, you can click there. So now let's get into these 18 points. So first, the point they made was about Daniel. They said Daniel was 10 times wiser and healthier when he ate only vegetables. And this is correct. And the evidence for this is Daniel chapter 1, where Meshach, Shadrach, Abednego, and Daniel, they refused to defile themselves with the king's delicacies, so they would not eat the meat on the king's table. Instead, they would only eat vegetables and water. So they didn't drink alcohol either. And after 10 days, they were found to be wiser, 10 times wiser and healthier than everyone who was eating the animal flesh and drinking the alcohol. So I'm glad they brought that up. It's also sometimes people do Daniel fast or Daniel diets where they give up animal products for however long they're doing it. And I think that's what got Cam on this road to asking these questions. So if you haven't tried that, if you're not vegan, I would highly recommend doing that. Second point they made was there was no death or bloodshed in God's very good design. And this is also accurate, that if you read the very first chapter of Genesis, verses 26 through 31, it talks about God speaking the world into existence, speaking animals into existence, blessing them, speaking humans into existence, blessing us, telling us to have dominion over all the animals. And then, of course, the very next passage is eat the fruit of the tree and the plants of the ground, that shall be your food. And he sees everything that it's very good. So there's no killing, no bloodshed. Everybody is vegan in God's very good design. So I'm glad they mentioned that. They're absolutely correct. A third point that I would like to mention that they bring up in the film is that spokespeople claiming to represent Jesus, so pastors, evangelists, etc., misrepresent Jesus in so many ways when it comes to how we're supposed to treat animals. And some of the examples they gave, they found some really good clips. And of course, I've encountered this many, many, many times throughout my ministry. So some examples of the clips they used: people saying God commanded us to eat animals, God created animals for us to eat, Jesus ate meat, Jesus did not die for animals, vegans are following a doctrine of demons. I've heard these things dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And we've done several live talks and videos and written articles on these topics. Two that I would recommend is our FNL talk number 69, What is Biblical Veganism? Or FNL talk number 25, Why aren't more Christians concerned with creation care, especially church leaders? This will give you a lot more insight into these topics. So fourth, Jesus disrupting the temple was about animal liberation. And this is also accurate, where a lot of people, they'll claim, well, it was really about the money changers. People were just ripping people off, and that's what Jesus had a problem with. But the money changers aren't even mentioned in the account in Luke. So clearly they are not the main focus. And we'll get into a couple more of the specifics, but the passages Jesus quotes, he's not quoting from Proverbs that says, don't do dishonest business with weighted scales. So clearly that's not what he has a problem with. He's quoting Jeremiah and the prophets, passages where it's saying God does not want animal sacrifices. So clearly that's the main issue that Jesus has a problem with, in alignment with all the prophets that came before him. So another excellent point that they made. Now, fifth, the temple was a huge slaughterhouse where there would be rivers of blood draining into reservoirs underneath the temple. Again, accurate. And this is something that a lot of people overlook. They think, oh, the temple, it must be just this place of worship, is this sort of mega church or whatever, that they all come and just pray to God and sing songs to him. And no, that's not what it was. It was literally a giant slaughterhouse. And so these priests would be the slaughterhouse workers. And you would bring these animals and have them basically bludgeon the animals to death, slit their throats, and there would be these pools of blood. But where does all this blood go? Well, it has to be drained into these drainage channels underneath the temple. And so I'm really glad that they depicted the temple this way, because a lot of people just don't make that connection. But that's accurate. And of course, they show you, he's literally walking through these channels in the video. So a really excellent job the way they did that. Point number 6, the temple was also a huge money-making enterprise for the priests and the king. Also accurate. And this is common knowledge, and you get this throughout the Hebrew scriptures and throughout even the New Testament when it talks about the temple. So a little bit of background, the King Herod appointed these Sadducees. They're the ones who were in control of the temple at the time of Jesus when he was disrupting the temple, and they were selling animals for profit to be sacrificed. And it was a huge money-making enterprise, and we see that it still is today, with kosher certification and halal being combined $1 trillion industry. So halal is sort of the Muslim equivalent, kosher is the Jewish equivalent. And so this idea of profiting off of animal slaughter is nothing new. And we see that the animal agriculture industry is this huge, huge, huge industry. So for the temple to be not only a slaughterhouse, but a slaughterhouse for profit is another important point that was brought up. Now, 7, this is one that really blew a lot of people's minds. And it's something that we've done a live talk on. We've done a couple of live talks on this subject, but particularly on this word parim, which we recently did one live talk, FNO number 125, God hates violence. And so this word, there's 2 words for violence that are typically used throughout the Hebrew Bible. One is parim, one is Hamas. And here the word in Jeremiah 7, verse 11 is parim. And that's the thing that Jesus is quoting when he is disrupting the temple. And he says, you've made my father's house a den of thieves. But the point that they brought out in this film, which is excellent and exactly correct, is that word that's often translated thieves or robbers is better translated violent ones. And so it's a den of violence. And again, as I mentioned before, that he's quoting from Jeremiah in a passage where he's saying God does not want animal sacrifices. So clearly that is the main focus of why Jesus is disrupting the temple. And again, you can go through and click all these links afterwards. I'm sort of flying through it. I want to make this sort of as short as possible, but I want to make the review as detailed as possible so that if you want more information, you can click through these. There's only so much they can scratch the surface of in a 2-hour film, but we have hours and hours and hours of our own videos that we've made on these topics and detailed written articles on these subjects. So I wanted to sort of link you to those in case you want more information. So point number 8, Jesus the Nazarene represents who Jesus was rather than what town Jesus was from. Another excellent, often overlooked point. And they interviewed Robert Eisenman on this point, and they brought up that Josephus and many other early church historians, I guess he's not church, but early first century historians and things of that nature, they mention basically every small town in the Galilee, and not once do any of these early sources mention a town called Nazareth. And there's like 200, I think, that Josephus mentions. Not one of them is Nazareth. Not once is a town called Nazareth mentioned anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. And so there's no evidence of a town called Nazareth existing until later in like the late 2nd century, 3rd century. And I think that they're getting that from this sort of mistranslation in the Bible. And I provided some further evidence if you want more information about what the Nazarene means. But the early evidence suggests that it means something like the righteous one or the devoted one or the truth. And so in John 14:16, it says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And this is Jesus speaking. And so it's the way of redemption. That's what the name Jesus or Yeshua means. The truth is the Nazarene, and the life is the anointing or the Meshach or the Christ. So now point number 9, dominion means our responsibility of stewardship. Another excellent and correct point. They interviewed Andrew Lindsay, but further evidence for this point is that the Genesis 1:27 and 1:28, that's where God creates humanity in his image and likeness and gives them dominion. But then in the very next verse, Genesis 1:29, it says, eat the fruit of the tree and the plants of the ground, that shall be your food. So people often point to dominion and say, that's why I have a license to kill and eat animals. We have dominion. The very next verse, God says it's not that. So if you'd like further information about that, I provided evidence for the Vegan Christian Discipleship School, the Dominion lesson. So we've talked quite a bit on this subject, how dominion is responsibility and stewardship. It is not licensed to kill and eat animals. In fact, it is the exact opposite of that. That's the one thing God says it's not. So point number 10, Christians do all kinds of evil toward animals in the name of Jesus. And I think they used a really excellent example of this this young boy who was, or this young man who was hunting for the first time with his father, and it was this Christian youth hunting club. And basically this kid kills a deer, and they sort of interview the kid and show the father literally wiping blood on the kid's face, saying, don't wipe it off today. This is your sort of initiation. It's just extremely demonic the way it's sort of portrayed, and which is true. It is demonic. And so the fact that people are doing these things in God's name and praying to him, being like, oh, give me a good hunt today. And it's like, well, you're doing the exact opposite of God's will. So why are you praying to God to bless this thing that you're doing that's the opposite of what he's saying to do? So I think that was a really good example that they brought up there. 11, nearly every major world religion has kindness to animals as a central precept, despite few religious people, or non-religious people for that matter, actually living out this principle. So it is not just Christianity that is hypocritical in this regard. Another good point that they brought up, and I'm glad they did this, because this isn't just saying, well, the Christians are all hypocrites. There's this hypocrisy throughout all the different religions. So it's not something that's unique to Christianity. So I thought that was a good point that they brought that up to show that it is more widespread than just Christianity. So the next point, number 12, non-vegans have cognitive dissonance when it comes to animal cruelty. Exactly right. So the term cognitive dissonance, it's a psychology term where it's another sort of word that's used typically in the Bible by Jesus. He calls it hypocrisy. And it's where you believe one thing but practice something that's the opposite, or you have two contradictory beliefs. So for instance, if I say I love animals and then I pay someone to kill animals so that I could eat their bodies, well, those two things are contradictory. So I can't love animals and pay someone to kill them at the same time. And the example they gave was really interesting. This guy who had a YouTube channel called Food for Louie, where he would go around and find roadkill and he would eat the roadkill raw. And they interviewed him and he said that Christians would often say he was demented and they would pray for him for his deliverance from this. And I really like the conclusion of the film where they showed him again, and now he's vegan. So all these people who are praying for him and then driving through the Chick-fil-A drive-through line to, order their dead chicken bodies. It's like those people are only one step removed from the eating roadkill Louis. Whereas now this repented Louis, who's eating the very good diet that God designed us to eat, is way closer to the kingdom than any of those people in terms of doing God's will. So I just thought that was really cool. And I also like that they sort of did this thing where they were interviewing a guy and he goes, well, I wouldn't eat a dog, but no one does that. And they immediately cut to the film of the Yulin Dog Festival where people are eating dogs. So I thought that was really well done the way they did that. And they interviewed the perfect person to talk about cognitive dissonance, Dr. Melanie Joy, author of the Carnist Matrix. She's a professional psychologist, excellent speaker. And this is a photo of me where I met her at the Animal Liberation Conference recently. So number 13, free-range regenerative farming is not better, nor is kosher, halal, or anything else short of full vegan. Really glad they brought up this point, because a lot of people will watch a film like this and go, wow, that's horrible. What happens to animals? I'm going to only buy free-range grass-fed animals. And they think, well, that's solving the problem. No, it's not. That's really no better at all. And most of that is just false advertising to sell things to people that they shouldn't be purchasing. So they did a really good job of interviewing this one guy who was holding a regenerative farming practice. He had a farm that he was doing this. And one of the quotes was, killing animals every day is not good for your psyche. Duh. Like, that's obvious. And then also how there's all this culling that's involved as well. So another excellent point they brought up. 14, there is ample evidence that Jesus and his earliest followers, including all of his apostles, were vegan. And this is something you're not going to get if you only read the biblical texts of the New Testament. You'd be like, what are you talking about? They were Galilean fishermen. And what are you talking about? Jesus ate fish. Luke 24, 42, and 43. And what are you talking about? They had a fish fry on the beach on John chapter 21. But if, as a source critic, this kind of, it's like, all right, well, this is, none of this was true in the first century. This is all second century material that you're citing. But they did a really good job of citing some of the extra biblical sources that point to this. And again, you can only go through so much in a 2-hour film, especially when they're trying to cover so much ground. I would recommend looking at a video that we did. It's a 30-minute FNL with a Q&A afterwards, entitled Evidence for Veganism in the Early Church. And it's a slideshow presentation where I go through dozens of early church passages and evidence from all these different sources that are admitting that the apostles were not only individually vegan, but they were collectively all vegan. And that was something that Jesus was teaching them to do. So I highly recommend watching that video we did. 15, Jesus said, I came to destroy the sacrifices, and if ye cease not from sacrificing, the wrath of God will not cease from you. And this was when they were interviewing Keith Akers. He's the author of The Lost Religion of Jesus, which, by the way, if you haven't read that book, I've looked through pretty much every source that he cites, and every single one of them is verifiable. So a lot of these books that are written and articles that you see online, they quote a bunch of things from early church people, and half of them are wrong. Keith Akers' book is not one of those books. Everything that he is citing is verifiable. This particular passage is from Epiphanius at Panarion 30.16 when he's talking about the Ebionites. And so he's what's known as a heresiologist, where he goes through all these different groups that existed prior to him. And so when he's talking about these Ebionites, which is referring to the Jerusalem church under James, so this would have been like one of the earliest forms of Christianity in the time of the apostles. And so in one of the earliest works that was produced, there's this quote, "I came to destroy the sacrifices, and if you cease not from sacrificing, the wrath will not cease from you." So it's unclear whether this is from the original Gospel of Matthew and it was taken out, or whether it was from some other text. But we see several other passages during the temple disruption that are right along these same lines. And it was clear from even the epistle to the Hebrews, but also throughout pretty much every first century text or every idea that dates back to first century Christianity. They're very much opposed to the sacrificial system. And so this quote would be exactly the kind of thing Jesus would say, if not an exact quote of what he actually did say. So I just want to say that that is a verifiable quote, and this is the reference. Now, I said there were 18 points. 17 of the 18 are things that I agree with. This is the one of the 18 that I disagree with. And this was the point where they said that Paul was anti-vegetarian. And they interviewed Andrew Lindsay when this point came up. And this is a common thing. Paul's a very controversial figure. And there is evidence to support this position that Paul was anti-vegetarian. This is something that we've spent a lot of time addressing as Creation Care Church with our live talks and Swords to Plowshares with my own individual ministry. And I wanted to point you to resources that would sort of combat this information, this what I take to be a misinterpretation of Paul. And so the three passages that people typically point to are 1 Timothy chapter 4, Romans 14, and 1 Corinthians 10. And so we did live talks on each of those topics. So if you want to learn more about 1 Timothy chapter 4, that's FNL number 15, were animals created to be eaten with thanks. Romans 14, that's FNL number 38, does someone have weak faith if they don't eat animal flesh? And then for 1 Corinthians 10, see FNL number 22, why in 1 Corinthians 10 does Paul say to eat whatever is sold or served without raising questions of conscience? So we address that, all those things individually in detail, but really the takeaway when it comes to Paul, and this is point C here, Paul says, I will never again eat meat. That's 1 Corinthians 8:13. And he instructs the church, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. It's 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1. This sounds much more like a testimony in favor of veganism rather than against it. So if he's saying, I'm never again going to eat meat and I'm following the example of Christ, and I want you to follow my example as I follow Christ. Well, I don't know how we can understand that as him being anti-vegetarian. And I think that this point is going to deter a lot of Christians from taking this message seriously. So they'll be like, whoa, you're anti-Paul? That's like he wrote half the New Testament. Like, and if they're saying he was anti-vegetarian, well, then they're like, all right, well, I guess I'll listen to Paul telling me I should be anti-vegetarian. So I wish they would not have included this point. I wish they would have maybe watched some of my FNLs on this subject and maybe learned more about what was going on there, maybe gone a different direction when it comes to Paul. But that's sort of the one thing that I wish they would have done differently about this film. So 17, what would Jesus do in the world today? One thing he would do is liberate animals from their oppression. Again, good point. And this is where he was using those bracelets that I might be dating myself, but those what would Jesus do bracelets that everyone was wearing when I was growing up. And the reality is, even when he was interviewing these pastors who are very much against veganism, they were admitting that, yeah, Jesus probably wouldn't kill an animal, or they were sort of dumbfounded as to like how Jesus would do it. And well, obviously Jesus would not be doing it. And if you look at all the evidence carefully, you will see that he would be opposing the systems, just like he opposed when he was disrupting the temple in his time. And if you'd like to see how these things are going on today, how people are taking a stand similar to the one Jesus took when he was disrupting the temple. I linked to a video called Preaching the Word of God at a Slaughterhouse Lockdown. And that's where I was giving a speech before Slaughterhouse was locked down. So I recommend you watch that. Now, 18. If we can transform religious establishments to become vegan, that would result in the whole world going vegan. Amen. This is obviously an optimistic outlook, but it's one that I also share. And I think that this underscores the importance within the animal liberation movement to really leave space for leadership from a religious perspective. So, for instance, I encounter this a lot when I am involved with animal rights events and things like that, where there's all kinds of anti-Christian, anti-religious sentiment. People will mock people of faith, and this is hurting the movement. So if you're doing it, stop doing it. And if you hear someone else doing it, call them out. Say to them, hey, have you watched Christspiracy? Jesus is the founder of this movement. Why are you mocking people who are following Jesus? So stop doing that. You're hurting the movement. And also, another thing you can do is recognize the work that's being done for animal liberation by devoted Jesus followers. So this film is exposing something that's been hidden for, thousands of years, but it hasn't been hidden from everyone. There's been sort of a remnant of people who hear this message loud and clear. I am, of course, one of them, but Creation Care Church, Christspiracy, Sarks, Milton Mills with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, PETA Lambs, allcreatures.org, Live Mercifully, many others. And so acknowledging that there are people within the movement who are devoted followers of Jesus who are fighting for animal liberation just as hard as people who are not Christians. So now just kind of to recap and further resources to look into. I was very impressed with the depth of research, the quality of people being interviewed, and the overall message of the film. So excellent job, Kip and Cam. And anyone who hasn't seen the film already, I would highly recommend going to watch and see it. And if you have seen it, I highly recommend going through the written review here and looking at some of these resources that I've linked to. Secondly, people often ask me why, as a devoted follower of Jesus, I'm so involved in activism and disruptions. I always say it is because that is what Jesus did. And this film does a great job of capturing that truth and how it has been hidden from so many for so long. So thank you for bringing that to the public attention, Kip and Cam. And now, again, Christspiracy only scratches the surface. There's only so much you can include in a 2-hour film. So I highly recommend going to Creation Care Church. We've done more than 125 weekly live talks, which is sort of a sermon followed by Q&A. So you can participate by asking questions and I'll answer them on the live. And I linked to the Facebook page and the YouTube channel. Those are the two places that we go live each Friday. Also, the Vegan Christian Discipleship School. If you want even more in-depth, we provide in-depth study guides on all of these topics with dozens of scripture verses and such. Also, Swords to Plowshares, that's a YouTube channel and website. And that's where I present some of my academic information about first century Christianity. And then again, the one video that I would highly recommend everyone watch, which really goes into the material in Christspiracy kind of all in one place, is Evidence for Veganism in the Early Church. And I link to that there. So 2 overarching messages that I took away from the film that I encourage you to likewise take away from it and share with others. The first is that the knowledge that Jesus was an animal liberator who opposed the practice of temple sacrifice and animal slaughter, and that this truth has been covered up and hidden for far too long, despite it being in plain sight, even in our own Bibles. So absolutely, I agree. And this was my first takeaway message. And then the second, also very important takeaway message, and this concerns what we as viewers of the film should do with this knowledge. And the way they phrased it was tag you're it. Now, what I take this to mean is now it's our turn to put this knowledge into practice. Let's all become disciples of Jesus, embracing his guidance, walking just as he walked, opposing the system of violence and injustice that he opposed, and continue the movement that he started 2,000 years ago. So Amen to that. Let's all become disciples of Jesus. Tag, we are it. So now, as we're releasing this Christspiracy review on Resurrection Sunday, I'd like to close by saying on this Resurrection Sunday, let's resurrect the message of animal liberation and incorporate it back into the gospel message where it belongs. The gospel is good news for all creation. Jesus came not only to save humans, but to redeem the whole world from the sway of the wicked one. Let's renounce the violent and misguided ways of the world, and let's walk according to the way of our King, Jesus. Let's all say in one accord, your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Let's all follow Jesus. So thank you for watching this review. And again, you can go to s2p.org or creationcarechurch.org to see the written review with all the clickable links. Thank you.